Hello, everybody. Here is Michael from New Left, and today I'm looking forward to this discussion because we will be talking about our big home, which is European Union. And lucky me, I found someone who's well versed in this whole, well, what is it, a moloch of an institution. Stephanie, can you please introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, how you came to be interested in European Union, and so on?
Yes, thanks for the invitation, Michael. Yes, I'm Stephanie Wool. I'm a political scientist and I'm a professor at the University for Economics, Management and Finance here in Vienna. And yeah, I teach courses on the European Union. I've been studying the European Union for a long time now, ever since I wrote my PhD 2003 to 2006. I started to engage more directly with the European Union in the European integration process. And so I work on the political economy within the European Union, also from a gender and intersectional perspective. And I try to look at the processes as well as the institutional ones and the political economy, which is going on. And of course, all that is interlinked. As the name already says, the political economy is political. And yes, and of course, just at the moment, we have a lot of topics within the European Union, and we will discuss about that today, right?
No, sure. So let's jump into the deep water. I would say that this is a pretty neoliberal project. Maybe in the beginning it wasn't the intention, but that's how it developed in the last 20, 30, 40 years. So what is
Mhm.
your take on this claim? Am I totally off, or is there a grain of truth in that statement?
Well, yes and no, because like you said, originally it was meant to be the EG or the European Community, as it was formerly called in 1956 when it was founded by France and Germany, um, on the um, on the idea of having peace after the Second World War. That's always the narrative of how the European Union was originally founded. And of course, we have like the founding so-called fathers like Jean Monnet, who had this intention. I myself had this Jean Monnet professorship for some time now. And yes, but we can of course see that the European Union has always been uh, not only a political project, but an economic project. It was about economic integration, post-war economies to elevate the economies of France and Germany, and then taking on different countries and different member states during the course of the years. And what we can see actually is a little bit around the 1980s, where we still had Great Britain as part of the European Union, right? Um, that we saw that, of course, these neoliberal ideas came into the European Union quite starkly by Margaret Thatcher, who has this famous saying of there is no alternative, Tina, it's
Mm,
called, and there is no such thing as society,
when I have
she says,
nightmares,
right?
Tina
Yes.
is there. Yeah.
And of course, a lot of social fights and conflicts, especially in the UK, happened in the 1980s or already 1970s. The decline of workers' right in the UK, for example, coal mining strikes, etc. And we can also see this development happening slowly in other countries with the start of the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. Because with this, we have these criteria, the so-called Maastricht criteria, which are very dominant, I would say, in the European Union, of the state deficit not to exceed 60% of GDP or 3% of budget deficit also. And so that's one of the main problems also, I would say, nowadays. For example, Austria now is under this deficit procedure just now because it exceeds the 60% deficit. And yes, so why can we call this also sort of like a neoliberal project? Because, as I would argue, neoliberal ideas on competitiveness, for example, or focusing more on the individual, have taken claim ever since the 1992 Treaty of Maastricht in a certain way. Because in the 1980s, we still had Jacques Delors, who was the Commission president at the time. He still wanted a social dialogue, actually. And he installed this and also more social cohesion. And he was very much in favor of social policies. But the social policies, as we know, don't fall under the European regulation in that sense that there's regulation on it. You know, that there's like no directives which are binding for member states to be implemented within 2 years if the Commission and the trilogue decision-making process of the Council and the Parliament agree on a Commission proposal on a directive. So what has happened is, because of the subsidiarity principle in the realm of social policy never had the same stance, I would say, as, for example, economic integration. So here we have quite an imbalance between social integration on the one side and economic integration on the other side, and always I would say, normative assumption of competitiveness being quite strongly adhered to within member states because of what the Commission has set as priorities also. And of course, the Commission is not the only one in this process of supranational institutions. It's, of course, also the Council. And in the Council, there's the prime ministers or presidents or representatives of the member states' governments, right? Or the ministers of specific sections, like the finance ministers in the ECOFIN Council, etc. So they have in the past, ever since, especially, I would say, during the last financial and economic crisis of 2008, fostered even more competitiveness. For example, Wolfgang Schäuble, the former financial minister of Germany, never wanted bailouts for other member states such as Greece, Spain, Portugal, or Ireland, because it was, like he said, it was their own fault that the state has such a high deficit. Well, of course, one can argue, yes, maybe Greece had some problems in their administration about taxes, etc. But on the other hand, the International Monetary Fund, which was also part of this process of giving loans to member states or to have this agreement in so-called memorandum of understandings, which were set up between the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, and the member state which had a very high state deficit, for example, Greece. They could have talked about other means of supporting these member states. But because, Wolfgang Schäuble and other protagonists had this very clear vision of not bailing out other member states, even though this would have been possible. And we have seen that this is possible after the COVID-19 pandemic now, because there we actually had this process of supporting member states by the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which was set up like which is like a loan and grant giving facility, like the structural funds are also like that, right? So, it's always about politics. So the way the European Union is structured, it always, of course, depends on which party is in power in the member states themselves, or how the Commission sets its agenda. And coming back to this question, if the European Union is more neoliberal, yes, I would say it has had this agenda up until 2018, 19 even. Then with the pandemic in 2020, it sort of like changed a bit for a short period of time, because Ursula von der Leyen, as new Commission president, really tried to, support member states during the pandemic, because we have seen, all these problems of lockdowns, of supply chains being interrupted, etc. The economy going down, small and middle-sized companies not able to succeed, etc. So there was this will to support the economy, of course, in that sense. And what we are witnessing now, we still have to see where the road goes to, actually, I would say, nowadays. But as we have so many other conflict settings at the moment, the full-scale war in Ukraine, now the Middle East conflict with the United States in a full-fledged war against Iran. Of course, the European Union sort of like has to resituate itself within this. And I think we will see where the journey goes, not only concerning economic policies, but also concerning, how the European Union will position itself in this geopolitical conflict in the world, which has already so many dramatic consequences, as we see just now in April 2026. with oil prices rising, etc., gasoline rising, prices rising, that we will see where this journey actually goes. So I think it is interesting that because we can argue, yes, it has been this neoliberal framing until the pandemic, and we will see where the journey goes from here.
Mm.
Mm.
A question to the Maastricht Treaty and the 60% threshold for the debt. Where did that number come from, and who was actually the front runner for that number? Because obviously it didn't come from Moses or God or whatever. Someone had to come with that idea that, hey, 60 is the magical number, not 80, not 75, not whatever. And
Actually, that's a
other,
question I can't answer. I don't know the person
okay.
in
Yeah, but it
concretely
doesn't have
who.
to be person, but this whole train of thought that led to that decision. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not asking about the person per se. I'm asking more, I mean, the assumption that I have is that there might have been, I don't know, that's the question, some German obsession with the debt as the reasoning that this happened and that the number, whatever, 60 suddenly emerged because as far as I can tell, only Germany is so mega obsessed with that. You were talking about Schäuble. The other countries, not so much. Yeah, not to mention that, well, big chunk of the European Union countries don't actually even follow this guidance, and Italy is at hundreds,
Exactly.
whatever. Yeah,
Exactly. And
so
also
it's
Germany, I mean, that's the interesting part about it. Even in 2004, or around that time, Germany exceeded this debt threshold, right? So not even Germany adhered to it. But of course, since Germany and France at the time were so powerful also within the European Union, nobody bothered, right? So it was only in the financial crisis of post 2008 then that it became a problem, of course, because of the banking. Actually, it was a banking crisis, right? And
mm,
bank debts and bank failure was at the forefront. So that's the thing that people wanted to avoid, of course, because they were saying the banks were system relevant. I mean, I cannot really judge since I'm not an economist if a lot of these banks were really system relevant. But of course,
I mean,
big
what I'm
national
blame them for
banks.
isn't that they saved the banks, is that the way how they saved them, that they fucked it up and they gave them all the money that they needed and just throw the money at them and restart again. And no one of those people will end up in prison because when you destroy your own economy, maybe at
The
least a
thing
little
was that, for
slap on your,
example,
huh?
just to give you an example, in Ireland, they socialized the biggest national bank, yeah, and of course the state had to account for that. So what does that mean? So it's if they if they make
Yeah, but
it.
that's more like an exception, this nationalization. In most cases, as far as I know, actually they just save them and the
Yes,
story
exactly. They put a
continues
lot of
without
money
any
in it, and of
punishment.
course,
No?
yeah, and the state can, of course, only can put taxpayers' money in it. That's the problem.
Hmm?
So actually, we all paid for the banking failure. Actually, we paid for those
No?
mismanagement decisions of the banks. Actually, right? We as taxpayers of European Union taxpayers. So that's one of the main problems. And at the same time, they told us a story. Okay, we need to, tighten our how do you call that, belts,
Hmm?
because we don't have enough money in the
Times are
state.
tough. We had to save these bankers. All this money that was spent on that,
Yeah,
and that
so we
they'd
save
get
the
these
banks.
bonuses.
And at the
It's
same
just
time, the problem was, of course, for example, in Greece or in other countries such as Ireland, they use this. I mean, this is just the way that the International Monetary Fund normally does it. Yeah, the so-called structural adjustment programs, the International Monetary Fund has been doing ever since 1970s, giving loans or money to countries, and then on a certain conditionality. And the conditionality is mostly to privatize most of the, yeah, for example, in
as
Greece,
neoliberal projects go,
yeah,
this is it. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So that is part of this neoliberal idea, of course, of complete privatization, or maybe not complete, but for example, in Greece, the port of Piraeus was privatized. It was bought by the Chinese, etc. The whole healthcare system had a lot of problems, and people were actually very, very, didn't have enough money anymore to pay for their medication, etc. Stuff like this happened because of these austerity measures. We had such a high rate of unemployment of young people, but also of older people, in Greece, in Spain, in even France, in Ireland, etc. So, and also, of course, in some of the Eastern European countries, right, which at the time were already part of the European Union. So it took a longer time to recover for them, especially Spain and Greece took a long
Yeah, but
time for the younger
that.
people, right?
Sorry to jump in. That's
Mhm.
the question. Why this
Yeah.
obsession with the debt? And why did we actually, not they, but did we inflict this straitjacket upon us? Because in Keynesian economics, when times are tough, government should invest. In neoliberal
Exactly.
economics, government
Yeah.
should straighten the jacket even more. You know?
Right.
And
I think that's
as
exactly the
theories
point, you know?
go, it looks like it's not working. So why this
Yeah.
obsession? I mean, why to keep
Well, there are certain
pushing
interest
something
groups, of
that
course,
that
there's of
isn't
course certain
working?
interest
No?
groups behind that, right?
No?
So yeah, you're completely right. I mean, it's not Keynesian or post-Keynesian politics. They did neoliberal politics in that sense, and and of course there's also big lobby groups behind that. The industrial lobby groups in the European Union, the European Roundtable of Industrialists, always had a lot of influence also on the Commission, but also the national industrial lobbyists, for example. We can say that for Germany at least, because we have some evidence of it. You can even find in the
Touche,
concrete
but
government papers.
why this debt? Because when you look at Americans, they don't give a fuck. Yeah, they have 100 plus. The Japanese have 200 plus. Like we Europeans we
Mm.
go outside of the herd. I mean, everywhere it's neoliberalism more or less, but the 60 percentage obsession,
Yeah.
it's our
Well, it's
self-inflicted
like a
pain.
belief
So,
system. If
no?
you believe in something, if you believe in this ideology of having this threshold, it's more or less a common belief, I would say. It's not very rational,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
even,
yeah,
right?
but that's the juxtaposition with Americans or the Japanese. Like, you don't have to be a well-versed economist to see that. Okay, so why for us 60 and they can have 200 or they can 130 or whatever? Yeah, like I mean,
Yeah, it's a good question. You'd
it
have to
screams
ask
like
all those
something is
who,
odd here. Yeah, if
yes.
everyone would following the same rules, then even though it's a stupidity, okay, I can understand it. But we
Mm.
inflicting on us this straitjacket, and I don't understand why. And I'm trying to
Yeah,
find
I
out.
think, yeah, it depends on the political stance you have, probably, right? I mean, if you believe in privatization, if you believe that the private sector can always be better than the public sector, then you get to the point of saying, oh, we have to support more businesses, of course, and we do have to support startups, we have to support young people in starting a business, etc., right? But at the same time, of course, you have to see that the public sector is the sector where you get taxes, right? So we have to uphold the public sector because it is so vital. Because what we have seen after 30 years or more of neoliberal policies is also where we are now at. We have a lot of far right parties actually now. And this is also, in my point of view, a follow up of these neoliberal policies because people, no, well, it's one part of the question actually, because people, for example, in Eastern Germany who don't find work, who are very low paid, etc., they have several contracts, or maybe they even run on subsistence economies, right? I mean, they don't believe in the state anymore. So what happens is that they go for the far right or extreme right parties and vote for them. Yeah. So that's one of the main problems. And on the other side, of course, you have very strong lobby groups. I try to explain this with the European Roundtable of Industrials, who have very high corporate interests in this. And of course, they lobby also politicians on the national level, but also on the EU level, right? So, I mean, they have been very let's say, successful in doing this. So that's the whole point of the story, I would say. And of course, there are a lot of books on this. And why this obsession with this threshold? I think it's a very hard ideology. That would be my
Mhm.
explanation.
The thing with debt, as I see it, is that there are two kinds of debt and two kinds of spending your money. You can spend your money on stupidity, and then I totally understand that, yeah, that's stupid. But then you can invest in something with huge growth potential, and then you actually outgrow out of this debt. Also, this is not rocket science. Everyone who's not who's a little bit worse in economics should know this. So that's why I'm so surprised by these rules we imposed on us, because there are debts and debts, but somehow in the project that we are kind of running under for the last 20, 30 years, we didn't differentiate, or they didn't differentiate between the bad debts and the good debts. As investment go, I mean, you are from Germany, so you know how Deutsche Bahn is functioning, and the underinvestment of Germany is 1 trillion euros supposedly. So this is not
Yeah,
helping even the industrialists. So
yeah, exactly.
I don't
Yeah,
understand the logic. Yes, that's bad, but when we invest in some strategic growth potential markets and industries, then at the end of the day,
exactly.
everyone benefits. But we didn't do that, and
I mean, you
I don't
mentioned Deutsche
understand
Bahn,
them.
which
Huh?
I think is a good example. I mean, it's the same procedure what happened in the UK, right? They privatized all the train and railway in the UK. What happened was huge problems in the UK railway system. I mean, now it's a bit better, but still. And yeah, and the main problem in the Deutsche Bahn, as I would see it, is also that, uh, of course, I mean, it's a long story with Deutsche Bahn and the failure of investment by the state into that more or less. I don't know the details about it, but yeah, I mean, investing in social infrastructure would be the thing to do, actually, right? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, gender scholars like me have been saying for years, right? We need to invest in schools. We need to invest in the public sector, right? We need to invest in all those really important laboring people, like in the care sector, in the hospital sector. As we have seen in the pandemic, we had huge problems in the sector, right? People not wanting to work there anymore, not enough people, not enough nurses, etc. During the pandemic. And yeah, so this is the sector actually, the pub, and some of this is of course still public, but there we also have the same problem, right? I mean, a lot of hospitals, the buildings themselves are bought up by huge investment firms. Um, and that's another point, right? And of course, investment firms want to make a profit. So they're not really interested in how many people get cured there, but how much turnover and profit the hospital makes. So that's another thing that I think we should think about really, really quickly now, because as we have also seen in the pandemic, that was one of the main problems in Spain, for example, where all those privatized hospitals, some of the workers there, they didn't even go to work anymore because they were afraid of getting sick, etc., and they were not paid very well. So people were just left in the hospitals to die. Actually, I mean, this happened in Spain, a
Mhm.
country in the western part of the European Union. Can you imagine, right? I mean, so yeah, I think all of these talks about assets and investing in buildings like that, which are actually public sector buildings, or should be. I think we should, look for different ways of investment strategies and not in the way it is going just now. Because in this way, the way it is organized just now, for everybody being able to buy anything, invest in any, let's say, public building or previous public building, or buying up. You have the same problem, for example, in Germany with the housing sector, right? A large investment firms buying up public property by the state, and now we have the problem in Germany as well as in other European countries and abroad. That people don't find affordable housing anymore, yeah, because of these investment firms wanting to make turnover, yeah, investing in these public buildings where people live and people rent, yeah, and the investment firms, they're not interested in how the people live there and renovating the building if it's an old building. They just want to make a short profit maybe out of it and then leave again, right? But that's one of the major problems nowadays in a lot of countries, in Spain, in Austria. Also, it's starting. It's not that bad yet, but it's also starting in Germany, especially, and that's why they have social movements. In Berlin, for example, where they try to resist this, actually, right? So yeah, so we see the link between all of these processes of investment firms or asset managers trying to find new ways for profit, which in their logic is of course understandable. But I mean, if you have like a human rights perspective, uh, you should ask yourself the question: is this really feasible for long-term strategies? And especially nowadays, when there's the risk, for example. I mean, look at the port of Piraeus, for example, or the port of Hamburg, for example, was to be sold to the Chinese. And now they thought maybe it's not such a good idea to sell the majority of the Hamburg port. Hamburg is in the north of Germany, big port, to sell all of that to the Chinese, because if the Chinese invest in this important infrastructure, then they might have a say over it. Then they might control supply chains, etc. And what happens when supply chains are controlled, we can see very well just now in the
Mm.
Strait of Hormuz, right? I mean, where the supply chains are not working at all anymore. So yeah, so you have to be careful who invests in your company, who invests in your port or in your public infrastructure. And I think this has become clearer now, unfortunately, but one must say, through the wars that are going on just now and through the new geopolitical situation. But that's one of the points. I think we're the European Union, or we as Europeans, as we might want to call ourselves, uh, should rethink, obviously. And of course, we need to rethink our strategies also vis-a-vis all the other global players, because actually we're not part of them. The European Union cannot compete with China, cannot compete with the US in that way.
No,
Uh,
we can, but
well,
we are failing. No,
we are
that's
failing in a very bad way at the moment concerning the war economy. I mean, if we look at that, uh, we have to invest more. We are failing also because we have all the Silicon Valley infrastructure in the United States or abroad, and not, for example, in Europe. That's one of the major
yeah,
problems
but
also we have here.
that's exactly where I'm going with all this question about the debt and about the lack of investment. That it's from my point of view, it's self-inflicted pain. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
like this had to be. This were decision by people not to invest because that is more important. Some magical number 60 is more important than the future. And I would argue even the industrialists are not profiting from it because at the end of the day, why are they going into hospitals and everything? Because there is nothing else where they can invest. No, well,
yeah,
when the infrastructure is crumbling and Germans don't have proper internet, like
exactly.
how can you start IT companies in Germany without internet? When you have this Funklocher, these places where just nothing is going on, like Germany, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
uh,
this kind of bites us in the ass, but we were following this path for 20, 30 years. It's
yeah.
in my eyes, it's crazy. I can understand when someone makes a mistake, it's fine. But when you make a mistake and then you cover it with another mistake of same kind and another and another and another, then it's like fanaticism. It's not
Yeah, it's
rational at
fallen on our
all.
head, all the developments of the last 20 to
And
30 years.
this is kind of what we are living through. That they
For
pushed it
example,
so
another
much.
example,
No,
yeah, another example. If, for example, also staying with Germany, if we had invested in solar energy more, in wind energy, 20
touche.
years
No, we
already,
wouldn't have
right?
the problems now.
We
No.
wouldn't have those problems we have now, right? I mean, yeah. So anyway, okay, nobody knew that, I mean, Russia would be, in the state of war against Europe again.
I can't believe that this is the excuse, even if
Well,
all these things wouldn't happen, it's still rational to invest into green energy because, well, we don't even
yeah,
produce the
but
oil
people
in
are not
Europe.
rational.
Yeah.
People have interests. I mean, as a political scientist, you know that you have to say that certain actors have certain interests, of course, they proceed with. And so people don't act rational in that way. They act rational for themselves, maybe, right? But I mean, of course, the economy is
Yeah,
also
but
very
that's the
emotionally.
question. Who really benefits from European Union as it is run now? I would argue no one. Yeah, the industrialists, they suddenly, I mean, the auto industry in Germany is crumbling because the gas isn't flowing from Russia. So, like, if I'm just looking at everything that's going on in European Union, I'm totally flabbergasted. Like, this is so fucking stupid. We
Yeah,
could have
the problem
been,
is that they
no?
didn't really, at a certain point of time, I mean, they trusted the investments in Russia or with the other countries more, and they thought probably also that, yeah, Putin, this appeasement policies they did with Putin of, having trade agreements with him, etc., would appease him also, but it didn't work out as we have seen. So yeah. So the thing is, for example, take solar energy or windcraft. I mean, we still have to discuss in Germany, really, nowadays. It doesn't look so good. It disturbs this or that, neighborhood, etc. I mean, what are we talking about? We have really big problems in the world, and people are
Mm.
discussing that they don't like the look of windcrafts. I mean, this is absurd,
Now,
really, right?
even wind,
Yeah.
as I can understand, but solar panel, who can be
Yeah,
blaming solar power on your roof? Like, who cares? It's
exactly.
there. I mean, something
Yeah.
has to be there anyway. So I just, I really, I don't understand the logic behind everything that happened in 20, 30 years, in the last 20, 30 years, because I don't see anyone who benefits really. I mean, in my eyes, and
Well, of
that's the
course, people
question,
benefit.
maybe, yeah, but not in the long run. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
what the probably the logic of the short-sightedness that in the long run, I mean, I don't see anyone who's kind of singing songs nowadays. I mean, Chinese are beating us, Americans are beating us, and just wherever you look, the industries in Europe are crumbling. I don't see much future for us exactly because of the underinvestment and of all the lost opportunities that we just gave away.
Well, maybe I'm not that pessimistic. I try to be an
I'm not
optimist
a
of the
pessimist. I
mind, at
try to
least.
be realist. I mean, just look at
Uh,
the future technologies of next 50 years. I mean, it's definitely not car industry.
Well, the problem that we have that we're very much behind in Europe or in the European Union on all these IE technology, of course, just now. That's one of the major problems, I would say. Of course, we're behind in also
Green
defense
energy,
strategies, right?
uh,
Green energy, exactly. We're also behind in, yeah, with Volkswagen, we have the problem we can't compete with China anymore, right? I mean, we have a lot of problems at the moment. So yeah, we really have to change our economic strategies also, I would say, because I mean this geopolitical rift we're just living through just now with China and the US and Russia and India. Let's not forget India also, uh, as part of those global players and of the BRICS states. So also if we think of South Africa, in Brazil, right? I mean, of course, for example, if we think of Brazil, we have like somebody now, Lula again, being in government, who is more rational, I would say. But the same thing is, okay, how are we going to, first of all, now solve all those geopolitical conflicts we have? Because there is no strategy at the moment, as far as I see it, against Russia. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that we really have to think about what do we do at the eastern border to support Ukraine, to support also the Baltic countries, right? Because of course this will not end at the Ukrainian border. This whole conflict. I mean, that is clear, right? So what do we do in that concern? The other thing is that at the moment in the United States we have a president who we cannot rely on. So that is one of the major problems, I would say. Also, of
I said
course.
also it's a
So
big chance now, and finally we can be on our own and don't kind of hand it over
maybe,
to the
yeah.
Americans, no?
Exactly. Maybe we should see it as a chance to reorientate, also within NATO, for example, and really go more our own way as European Union and take the lead in certain industries which are competitive, which are, of course, high level industries or IT technology, etc. Right? I mean, we have the competences for that, but we have to like follow up on it also. We have to invest in these sectors, actually, I would say. Yes, and then of course we also have to still, that would I would always say, also support the public sector in those cases where it needs support. For example, not to privatize water and all those necessary social infrastructures like hospitals, railways, for example, so that we really have, a reliable social infrastructure for the future and a reliable infrastructure also in other concerns on green technologies and green energy, etc., right? Or also on IE, for example, artificial intelligence. So I think that that would be a good strategy to do. Yes, so let's see how the interests also on the level of the European Union will be constructed in this on this concern,
Mm.
because of course now we have to be go back to the member states, because the member states like Italy, where we have Meloni in government, so a far right government really. We have in France a very unstable situation at the moment with Macron ending his term and not knowing, who will proceed after the elections in government. Um, then we have Spain, which is more or less stable just now, actually, as I see it. with the socialists in government and coalition. And then what else? We have Poland, which is now stable, but we never know, how conflicts at the border might, change the Polish government again also. So actually, and then we have all those member states, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic,
The naughty boys. Yeah.
yeah, all those not very reliable, I would say, representative democracies at the moment. So we will see where the journey goes also, because I think this is a major conflict. And I mean, people have been talking about this unitary decision making, of everybody having to act accordingly, and not having voting out procedures like we have now on the level of the European Union, where Hungary can block everything. Hungary can even block the military support for Ukraine. So this procedure needs some rethinking, I would say. Yeah, and we should think about other majority procedures, for example, about that, because this has a very much big influence on how the economy in the European Union will function, how, money is divided among member states, etc. So this is a very major theme at the moment, also for political scientists, how the whole Trilogverfahren, so trilogue procedure, what it's called in English. So how this will be adjusted in the future, actually, right? So because we have, of course, luring on the horizon all these, also in Germany at the moment, the extreme right or the far right coming into government, probably in some of the federal lands of Germany in the near future, probably, as all forecasts say at the moment, in Sachsen-Anhalt, for example. Yeah, and we know from Austria also, we have the far right exceeding all polls, being around 36%, so the number one in all polls at the moment. So what does this mean for the future? We know already from the past that this meant, no balance of power anymore within liberal democracies, buying up all the media and suppressing the free media and all the follow-up problems going along with it, I mean, in Austria, we have the problem of the former Minister of the Interior of the FPÖ saying law has to follow politics. I mean, no, law does not follow politics. We had that once in Germany, and that was under Adolf Hitler, where law followed politics. So no, we have to clearly speak out on this and say, no, we need the balance of power. We need separate institutions, democratic institutions. We need a public sphere. We need to recreate and rethink the public sphere, because that's one of the other major problems at the moment, that we have so many sub-public spheres through the internet, through social media, that people do not communicate with each other anymore, only in their, subgroups. So that's one of the major problems also we have, that, all these processes of radicalization within the population also takes place, of course, on social media platforms, not only, but also. So that's one of the major problems I see for democracy at the moment also, that we have to be very, very much aware of that and not to drift off into these, extreme positions as we are doing it at the moment, actually.
Now, let's take a backup step. A question that I always ask myself and ask many of our guests is the failings of the left in European Union in the last 20, 30, 40 years, because I always usually argue that it's not that the neoliberal project is such a great idea. I mean, we were just, dissecting all the stupidity inside it, that it didn't really benefit almost no one. I mean, maybe short term benefits, but long-term benefits are really questionable. But I say that well, we leftists failed, like we didn't do our job properly. That the push to the right that is happening in Western Hemisphere is not because of the right wingers' splendid ideas. We see how terrible they are. I mean, just look at the average fella in America. It's not exactly fairy tale land, and in European Union is not that much better. Okay, it's still a little bit better, but compared with what was normal 50 years ago, I mean, people are struggling, definitely, even though we are richer. So something very broken is there. So let's bitch a little bit about the leftists in European Union. So what do you
Mhm.
think? Where did they drop the ball and allow these far-right narratives to dominate the media landscape? Because, you know, as stupidity goes, to hate the windmills and the solar panels isn't exactly the best way how to save your
Mhm.
kids from disaster. So, you know, just it's not rocket science to explain it to people, but we leftists kind of can't. I mean,
Yeah,
there
I
are
think one of the
positive
problems.
exceptions like Podemos
Mhm.
maybe or whatever. Occasionally some
Mhm.
leftists do win, but in the grand scheme of things, the whole European Union is moving to the right.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think the problem, like I said before, already started in the 1990s. The problem already started when, we had still the big catch-all parties like the Social Democrats and the Conservatives. I mean, which were already declining in the 1990s. Can remember when I still went to school, we already had a discussion about the decline of the catch-all parties like the Social Democrats or the Conservatives at the time. And at the time, they were really winning a lot of elections still.
Mm.
Now we have some of the social democrats in the European Union being around 16%, some even at 9%. I mean, it's really a bad state to be in. And also the conservatives, I mean, they are declining also, and the far right is rising in a lot of member states. So yes, what was the problem? I think there are several problems. The one is the thing 30 years of neoliberal policies leave their mark. I mean, they leave their mark in the people who think still maybe some of them profited from the way the economy functioned. Maybe some of them were able to buy their house and have a garden, have children, and all of this. But as we see from social science data just now, young people are not even able to afford buying a house anymore, for example. They don't even get a credit because they don't have a job, etc. Right? So this is happening. Of course, it is segregated among, who has a very high paid job, who has a lower paid job. But yeah, and maybe buying a house or apartment is not always the best option either. But anyway, that's another discussion. But the thing is, actually, I think that these far right developments are part of this, failure of modern democracies to realize the promises of modern democracies, of freedom and liberty, actually, which are the main concerns, and the freedom to vote, the freedom to participate in society. A lot of people actually cannot participate in society anymore. So this leaves them relatively open, of course, for some maybe populist who makes a lot of promises. Yeah, that he will make everything better, and mostly it's a he. I mean, there's also some she's, but mostly it's a man, as we have seen with Orban. And I mean, Orban. Let's take Hungary for example, because there's the election in Hungary next Sunday now. Um, Orban had sort of like, yeah, achieved sort of like through a very systematic way also of buying up certain companies, of uh, getting the media on, buying up the media also, etc. uh, and at the same time, during the financial crisis of 2008, supporting people and families, always in his doctrine of, the nuclear family being the only way of living, etc. So, but he was, until now, I mean, we will see on Sunday if he still succeeds or not. But in this scenario, and maybe take the contrast of Spain, right? Spain after 2008, um, then still had a conservative government, but then people voted for Podemos and the socialists afterwards. And there was a lot of elections again around 2016, 17. Spain had a lot of elections within national elections within 2 years or 3 years even, until now, where it's a bit more stable, I would say. But still there, of course, in countries like in Spain, after the financial crisis, the left was successful because it did go into the neighborhoods. It did support people who got expulsed from their homes because they couldn't pay the credit for their homes or apartments anymore. So there was a lot of support from the left. So the left did everything right, I think, in that sense, in Spain for the time being. But still, more broadly speaking, I think the social democrats and the conservatives both failed in really addressing the problems of the people. The people, I mean, and you have to be very country specific on this because there's very much differences between countries. For example, take Austria. Austria, I mean, which until now always had a very stable economy, more or less, right? It got very well through the last financial crisis. It just, it always did a very social partnership agreement style like economy in a certain way. But of course, here we also have some problems now. But still, I mean, why does it explain that the far right is so successful also in Austria? And of course, this also has, and this would be my second point, especially for Austria, you have to look at the cultural aspects. Yeah. Of course, topics like immigration or asylum seekers, all these kinds of events which happened in the last couple of years. And I would say the discourses around that of, people taking away our jobs or too many foreigners coming or asylum seekers coming to our countries from Libya or from Syria in the last couple of years, or from Afghanistan. All these world conflicts also feed into, of course, the European Union. And I mean, we know that the Dublin principle of, stepping where you first set your foot on in the European Union, that country has to do your asylum, if you seek for asylum, has to do this procedure with you. So of course, all of the southern member states had these problems, like who are in the Mediterranean Sea, like Italy, Spain, Greece, etc. So yeah, I think that's the other point, that these discourses, and the far right was very successful in propagating these discourses of, people, you know, flooding our economy, etc., which of course is not true. But these discourses prevail. And the far right was very successful in that. And the
I would
left,
say it's partially true. Now the
well,
amount of now in Germany you took into 1 million people, so it's like it's not nothing. That's percentage wise. It's like
exactly.
and here in Austria as well. I mean, 700,000 people from abroad is 700,000. It's
Yes. And of
eight
course, you
or
need
9% of
means.
no. It's just
Yeah, you need the means to integrate those people, and you need language courses. They need to learn the country's language, of course. I would always say that I myself, I used to live in the United States. Of course, I learned English to live in the United States and to be able to speak English. So yeah, so that's one of the things. And at the same time, though, I think yeah, Germany did quite well in integrating these people. I mean, and we are in need actually in these people because there are some of these people are highly specialized or used to be highly specialized in their countries. We need doctors from Syria, people like this. We need people who
well,
worked in the
I would
hospitals.
argue it's not exactly the nicest thing to do to kind of steal them from the poor countries towards the
No,
rich
that's not what I'm
countries. So
saying. But I
yeah,
said
but
what I'm
like
saying is,
it's
when
tricky,
there was a
no?
civil war in Syria, the people had to leave because there's a war, and they got, they were followed by ISIS, and they got killed a lot by terrorists like ISIS. So of course they needed to flee from those countries, right? I mean, that's a human right to get asylum someplace else, right? You have the right to have rights, as Hannah Arendt once said. Yeah, so that's very important. And I don't want to, not at all. And I'm not in favor at all of discussing human rights. I think this is a standpoint we should have, especially as Europeans. We know what disrespecting human rights means in European
No, that's
history.
not what I was
Yeah.
implying. I was implying
So,
that we are dying out more or less everywhere in Europe. I mean, the population is in decline, so the
yeah, but who
saviors.
cares? I mean, that's not the
No,
point. The point is actually, and that's
that's
one of the
not
problems,
okay. Let's have a
the point,
discussion about
yeah,
this. No,
no, I
because
think
we
the
should
point is, for
care.
example, in
No,
Austria, right? You have the problem here. Also, people, have prejudice against foreigners, all sorts of foreigners, even though a country like Austria actually has a lot of immigration. And even me, as a German, I'm working in Austria. I mean, that's normal for the European Union, but some of the Austrians might not like that because they could always say, Germans are taking our workplaces, Yes, of course we are. But of course, Austrians could also go to Germany. So, I mean, we have to have a reset of our mindset, actually, that we are really Europeans, that we,
No,
of course,
but
we have our
sorry to
country,
jump
we
in, but
have
this
our
is not what I
heritage,
was saying.
etc.
I was
No,
saying
no, no.
that
I'm not saying you're saying that, but I think
okay.
it's an important point, that we have to be more open-minded about this. And of course, we also have the problems which occur with that. Of course, we also have terrorists coming into our countries through that. So we have to have more controls in a way. Yeah, that's true also, because we had that problem. But we also have Russia now, getting people to do Attentate. How do you say this word in English? I can't remember. To do bombings or whatever, or to kill people before the German elections. So yes, we have a problem, of course, also with terrorism, and we have to be aware of that. Yeah, that at the same time there were so many people who needed to flee their countries to come here and be able to work here, and of course we need to integrate them, and of course there has to be a certain number, and that has to be divided between all of the member states. That's sure true, right? I mean, we can't take up everyone. That's sure true. But of course, we have to make it possible that the human rights that we stand of are also, fully accepted and that we live them. Because if we don't live them, who else will? Nobody else
Hmm.
in the world seems to be doing that at the moment,
I didn't want to
in a
go
way.
into this discussion about human rights. It wasn't the point. The point was that Europe, more or less, as far as I know, all European countries are dying out, and the
But what does that mean,
strategy.
dying out?
No,
Why
yeah,
are Europeans dying out?
no, it's 2.1 to kind of break even to well not die out. Yeah. So
But why is that important? I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? Does it matter?
I would argue it does because then the social structure kind of disintegrates, and so well, there will be so many old people and like
This is what you mean by dying out. I thought you meant something else. Okay,
no, no,
you
no,
have to
no.
be more
Just
precise about this. Okay.
I mean, the pyramid normally it should be a pyramid. Now, the older you are, the higher is the
I see what you
probability that
mean.
you will
Okay, yeah.
die. And because of complex reasons, I don't want to go into the reasons. It's just that it's happening that Europe is dying out. Yeah, and
You
I
mean
hear.
there's too many old people and not enough young
I
people?
mean,
That's what you mean.
I'm blaming the old people
Mm.
that are alive. That's not the point. The point is that people don't make kill kids. Yeah, it's just more or less in every country, we are dying out. I mean, in Slovakia, for example,
I
literally
don't know.
the
I don't have the numbers on that. Mm.
last few years were the worst years in the history since Second World War. So 89, 90, whatever years it is, it wasn't as bad as it is today. So something isn't working in our societies when people don't want to have children. Yeah.
Yeah, but
And
that's what I would say. That's also a problem because, we
that
don't have the
this is
opportunities to have children.
no,
We need
this
to
is
have work,
exactly where I
good
wanted
work,
to go
good
when you said
kindergartens,
that we
a
need the
good public
doctors
sector.
from when we need the doctors from Syria, is that this is the short-sightedness of neoliberalism, that instead of give people good jobs and good opportunities so that they are not scared to have
Yes,
kids,
of
we
course.
rather
Yeah,
import
of
workers
course.
from abroad because it's kind of easier to
No, but
fix
that's
our
not what I'm
problems.
saying, Michael. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to pinpoint one to the other. The thing is, of course, we need good educated people here, right, in the countries where we live in already, and support them to have good jobs, right, and good enough pay or loan actually to make a living from the wage you have, right? That's the point. And if we look at Germany for the last 20 years, loans have been going down actually, right? So we need different strategies of firms to invest in people again and not just on the international financial markets because it's more lucrative, right? So that's one of the major problems I would say also, that we need to invest in people, right? And but I mean the doctor from Syria is not our problem actually. I mean that it's just an example, but that's another story. You don't have to play out one against the other. I would say we need both. We need, as long as we don't have enough nurses, as long as we don't have enough well-paid kindergarten teachers, for example. Also, of course, people don't get kids because, of course, they don't make enough money to support their kids until they've made their own education. Having kids is expensive, and you have to have the time to raise kids, right? And I mean, take Austria as an example. Austria has the highest rate of female employment of part-time employment, right? 49% of female employment or even more now is part-time. So why is that so? Because we don't have enough public infrastructure to take care of the kids when the women could be working, you know. So that's one of the major problems, actually. And that's also the same problem in Germany, for example, right? And in other countries. France has a better system there because you have more day-long schools, for example, you know, where kids are at. But still, we need more support for the under 3-year-old children, for example. So it starts there, actually. So that also is part of the story of investing in social infrastructure, right?
Hmm. Now that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, whether the European Union project was more about economy than about this
Yeah.
social cohesion, infrastructure, everything, because I would argue that, yeah, definitely, like people are
Yes.
second grade citizens, animals, whatever, money, yeah. But this is kind of biting us in our asses right now, because, well, when we treat people like this, then yeah, surprise, they don't have kids, and now everything crumbles. So more or
Yes.
less, yeah.
Well, I don't know if everything would crumble. I would say it like that.
No, it
But
depends.
yeah, the problem is
Depends. I
that
mean,
people don't have
we
enough
will see what
support
will
to have
happen in 5
kids.
years, no?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. People don't have enough support to have kids, to take care of the kids. There's not enough support to take care of the elderly, for example, also, especially also in Austria. But we have the same problem in Germany also. So, you know, I mean, those are the countries I can talk best about because I work on those two countries at the moment. Yeah, but you have these problems not only in those member states. A lot of people pay privately, of course, for nannies, etc., or to take care of the elderly, and that's one of the problems of the system. And yeah, and in the European integration research, we have research on especially that those social policies, of course, need more support in that sense that we need more, not only the social pillars that we have since 2017, we need things which are like now in place. So now we have a directive on minimal salary, at least for the whole of the European Union. And that was a long time discussed, and people some member states didn't want it because they didn't want to have a decline in their minimal loan strategy or wage strategy. But I think probably they found a better solution because now there is this directive for it. So maybe countries who have lower wages can upgrade and others don't need to downgrade, right? So yeah, so of course there has to be coherence, and I know that also parts of the unions were not in favor of it, etc. So yeah, this is also but we also need other social infrastructure, not only on the employment sector. We also need that in the, like I was saying, for the elderly, right? In the care sector especially, and we're far from it actually. That's one of the major problems still, I think.
One of the last can of worms I want to open with you is the situation in post-communistic countries where the extraction of profits from Western companies is supposedly around 400 billion euros yearly. So as money goes, this is a big, big chunk of money. For Slovakia, the number runs around 20 billions. I mean, obviously, Poland is the biggest economy in post-communistic countries, so there is around 200 or whatever the number is. And the question is about the way how European Union was structured in the last 20 or 30 years, because I'm curious whether people talk about this setup, about the setup that as the Iron Curtain fell, the Western companies went into the East, bought whatever was there to be bought, and then they are extracting the rents and keeping the salary low. So the Caesar is open between the productivity and the real wages in post-communistic countries in a manner that is nowhere else in European Union. So it's just as strategy goes, I can understand this for a couple of years, but not for quarter of a century, because where it leads is that the underinvestment is in post-communistic countries because of all this extraction of, well, 400 billion is a lot of money, leads to this, well, how to put it, resentment in the population in post-communistic countries. And when you look at the data from European Parliament, who's actually voting for the far right and right politicians, it's primarily post-communistic countries. So when you take all of European Union as a one body and divide it into the West and the post-communistic countries, then the post-communistic countries are responsible for roughly 200% of the right-wing members of the European Parliament. So even though post-communist countries are smaller, roughly 100 million people, the push to the right from the East is much bigger than in the West. So as sad consequence of this strategy goes, the boomerang of turmoil is kind of biting everyone in the ass, because the European Parliament at the end of the day is the body that makes most of the decisions. And well, when the political situation is as it is, then even the Westerners are not happy. Yeah, not to mention that the inequality problem that that emerged in Western European countries because of all this extraction. It wasn't the average German or the French fella
Well,
who
you're
was
giving your own
benefiting.
answer already. Yeah.
No,
So you're
no.
giving your own
The
answer already.
question is whether the Western countries are aware of what's going on and whether there is a strategy to kind of change it, because this is something that is running for 25 years, and I rarely hear anyone in the West openly talk about it, because, well,
I can't say it broadly, like if anybody in the West is doing that. I mean,
whether you
when I look
heard
at
in European Union, in all the circles that you are running, that people are aware that, well,
the
this
thing
isn't
is,
very
for example,
nice.
if you look at Poland, for example, I mean, people in Poland, for example, of course, after communism, had very high expectations of the West or of Western capitalism. All the people I talked to who I knew at the time also, like in 1997, 98 already, they were very expectful of what was going to happen, and they thought that it would be a boost for them, right, in the economy, which it was for certain industries, of course, right, like you were saying. Yeah, but the revenues went to others, and the problem is still, for example, a teacher in Poland still only gets around 700 euro maximum per month. I mean, it still has in Warsaw a very high cost of living, almost the same as in Vienna. So how can this happen, right? And the thing is, of course, people were skeptical of the communist parties and didn't want them anymore, and voted for other parties who did more of these privatization processes, which happened in Romania and Poland and other countries, right? So yeah, that's part of the problem, I think. And ideologically, that's why they also maybe voted for far right parties, because they were deceived, actually, maybe. And they thought even their own governments deceived them, probably. And yeah, so the promise of the West, that gives them freedom and economic success, etc., didn't really happen for a lot of people in the Eastern European countries, if we look at the data also. So yes, one of the reasons is that, of course, they are disappointed. And here we get back to the parties in government, the parties letting free run of privatization, for example, and not, doing maybe also some deals with specific companies, etc. So that's one of the major problems, I would say. And if there is like a consciousness for it in Western Europe, I can't say that broadly. I think it's part of that problem of neoliberalization we were talking about before, that neoliberalism is such a strong ideology that people still believe that, you just have to turn this point or that, point, and everything will get better. Yes, but it won't. And as we've seen, investment firms still are looking for the best strategies to invest. They don't look at the people, they don't care for the public sector. So we have this clash of politics and democracy at the one side and of the economy on the other. And this is what we're living through just now. I think this is also part of the other question about the left. The left really maybe was never in a lot of countries, well, except for the Social Democrats who are in decline, and they are being, they are in decline for good reasons also, probably because people don't believe them anymore, because they were part of that problem in Germany, for example.
The
Gerhard Schröder did all
never-ending
these
Schröder
fast
story.
reforms. Yeah, exactly, for example, right? So yeah, so that's one of the things. And yes, so part of the left, or let's say of some left of the Social Democrats, I would say, is that problem that they were not receptive for the problems of the people who were actually their voters. So the voters turned to the right because they were disappointed. That's one part of the story. And in Eastern Europe, I mean, it's a bit of the same phenomena. You have then populists who come into place, like Orban and like others, right? Also, the PiS party in Poland was, because of the big Catholic belief in Poland. Still, they were able to, yeah, to gain votes by the people because the people believed. But it's more like a belief system. It's not a political ideology understanding of politics also, right? And that's one of the major problems, that politics is of course about ideology also, and about competing ideologies. And I think yeah, we really have to look at these problems. And also, apart from party politics, I think we have to come away a bit also from this left right dichotomy. Doesn't lead us anywhere. We have to make politics for the people, I would say. And I say this as a political scientist and not as a politician. If the middle, to support actually more the middle classes, because if the middle classes also derive and lose their faith in democracy, it turns really bad. And we can't want that. We don't want authoritarian regimes in the future. So I think we really have to look into what is going wrong very much in detail. And I talked about some of these details, like investing in care infrastructures or social infrastructures. And yeah, and giving also people the sense of having a future and not having fear of war, of international conflicts, of supply chain problems, etc., of rising energy prices, raising rents, stuff like that. So these are the big social problems of our time, and we have to look, hopefully, for democracy to solve them, right?
Last question, because you were alluding to it a little bit, that there is a change to be felt in European Union in the last couple of years because of the pandemic, and certain
Mm.
taboos were broken. So you see that all the optimistic thing that you said right now, that they can be implemented, because we too can dream about a better world as long as we want, but whether the politicians will listen and whether the populace will listen to, hey, changes had to be or have to be implemented. So how do you see it from the inside? Is the willingness there to kind of acknowledge that the neoliberal project wasn't as successful as they hoped?
Well, I can't really look into detail because I'm not looking into parliamentary decisions at the moment. I have some colleagues who are doing that, but as I know of reading their texts and books, well, this also, of course, depends on which party family you belong to, right? So if you belong to more to the left or Green Party family, you have more this sense of you need to do something for the people. But I think also in the Conservative Party family members on the European level, there's a sense of, okay, the pandemic showed us that we do need to do something for the people, not to drift off to the extreme
That
right.
Keynes wasn't
And at
completely off, yeah.
and at the same time, we also have the problem that some of the conservatives, as was just happened last week, also align with the far right on certain decisions, to get their decisions through. That's also part of the problem. Uh, I know. I mean, the argument is always, we have to talk to them because there's so many voters behind the far right just now. Yes, that's true. But does that make the decision better if you do the decision with the far right? I don't think so. I don't think in the end it will lead to good politics. And of course, I'm saying that, of course, people, even if you look at what is happening in Germany, in Eastern Germany with the AfD, of course, some little AfD group, maybe in some very small town, of course they're right. They're right when they say, "Oh, we have to invest in the school because our children don't even have toilets to go to anymore because the toilets are all rotting, and we need to invest into this building." Of course they are right. So I'm not saying that they don't have the right topics at some point, yeah. But I'm saying that the overall topics, and we have to have this clearly in mind, is that they have a completely different agenda for Europe, and they want to diminish actually the European Union, and that we have this broad picture in mind and to build alliances also between parties, but not necessarily with the far right. That would be my pledge, actually. So yes, I have the hope. I don't know if politicians have the sense beyond party politics to think a bit broader. I hope they do in all parties. And I think there are a lot of good people out there who do that already as politicians. Yeah, but we have to keep that in mind, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Steffi, thank you very much for all your
Yes,
answers and for your time. And hopefully, in a couple of months, we can discuss some other interesting topics about European Union because that's a never-ending story. You
that's
know,
true. Thanks a
at
lot.
the end of the day, it's our home, so we have to kind of clean it up. Yeah.
Exactly.
Break a leg. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.